Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Warren Thorngate. I'm the host tonight for this wonderful Almond lecture. Tonight we're going to hear some stories and statistics and other things about high technology in poor or middle income countries. And one of the world's experts on that is one of my former students, Dr. Halla Thorsteinsdóttir. Halla was originally from Iceland. She's now the director of Small Globe Incorporated and an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. She has been actively researching innovation and international cooperation in low and middle income countries for over 3 decades. Her research has been published in high prestige journals such as Nature journals, Science, Research Policy, and The Lancet, and has been covered by news media such as The Economist and Financial Times. Halla has advised a number of organizations on innovation and partnership issues, including United Nations Development Program, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and many more. I'm sure we're going to hear an interesting talk that's completely different than the last one on orchids, but just as interesting. Okay, Halla, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much for this introduction, Warren. I'll try to make it interesting. I'm not sure I can compete with the orchids talk. I hear it was brilliant. But good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at the Almond Lecture Series. And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. So I'm just going to share my screen. So just as Warren said, I'm going to talk about is high tech only for rich countries. This is the technology that only rich countries should be applying and harnessing. So what I want to do is talk about a sort of preamble. I want to then sort of move into talk about what is high tech and discuss how it has been changing in the context of developing countries for the last few decades. I want to talk about some experiences of promoting high tech in low-income countries and what has been the kind of message from that experiences. I want then to move into talking about access to technologies for populations in developing countries. Do they have access to high-tech technologies? Is that a challenge for them? I want to slightly shift gear and talk about if developing countries themselves, if they can develop technologies, and talk about a couple of examples of actually where they did. And then at the end, I want to answer the question, is high tech only for rich countries? I want to sort of start this presentation by talking about why am I interested in this topic? I started to be interested in science and technology in developing countries in the 80s, in 1984 to be exact. I was doing a master's degree at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at the time, and Caltech University, and I took a course with Professor Lynn Metzelka on this topic. And since then, I've been thinking about this topic. Sometimes I feel I haven't made huge progress, but it's been on my mind. So what has drawn me towards thinking about science and technology in developing countries is the experience of my own country. As Warren mentioned, I'm from Iceland. It's an island a bit larger than Ireland in the North Atlantic. Iceland used to be one of the poorest countries in the world, and in Europe, not in the world, sorry. And I just want to add here, because Canadians are always very skeptical when I say Iceland is a part of Europe. It is certainly a part of Europe. Icelanders lived off agriculture for centuries. The average temperature in July, its warmest month, is sort of around 12 to 14 degrees Celsius. And Iceland also has months of very limited daylight, being located so high in the north. So needless to say, agriculture was very marginal in Iceland. In addition, there were periodic volcanic eruptions, which added a burden to the agriculture. So Icelanders, they were dead poor for centuries. My father, for instance, he was born in a house that looked like this. Sorry, and actually, the majority of people who were born in the first part of the 20th century were born in houses like this. Now Iceland has higher GDP per capita than Canada, and it ranks number 3 globally in terms of the Human Development Index. It has one of the highest life expectancies in the world, close to 83 years old. So Iceland started in the early 20th century to modernize its fishing industry. They started by actually buying a single trawler at the time. And with this trawler, the Icelanders could go further afield to richer fishing grounds, and they could fish more. After that, there's been continued modernization of fishing industry. There is also a lot of modernization in producing products, and now they produce much more value-added fishing products, which provides more income to the country. Icelanders also have used geothermal energy, both to heat the houses and create energy. They have started to build high-tech industries, and such as information and communication technology industries. So thanks to using technology, the income of the country has multiplied manifold, and the quality of life has improved dramatically. People don't live in turf houses anymore. This may not be a typical house in Iceland at the moment, but these kind of houses exist, and the living standard in Iceland is very high, thanks to utilizing technology and modernizing the production. So I'm driven to understand how other countries can benefit from different types of technologies, and how they can enhance their economic well-being and the quality of life of the populations. So being a social scientist, I always want to start by defining terms. So how do we define high tech? So high tech is one of those terms that doesn't really have a mutually accepted definition. It's like similar to terms like innovation, it's common use, but there is no single definitions that everybody accepts, and it's a sort of a guidance for it. So I'm presenting here a definition from Merriam-Webster's that says that high tech is scientific technology involving the production or use of advanced or sophisticated devices, especially in the fields of electronics and computers. It's typically technology that has required research and development intensity to develop. It's basically a novel technology at the cutting edge, and it's constantly changing, and it is socially constructed. So there are many examples of high tech in developing countries. In the 1960s, high tech in developing countries referred to technologies like tractors. There were Massey Fergusons, which were a part of the mechanization of the agriculture in many developing countries. There were also turnkey factories where they were also in vogue. Then hybrid seeds were all the rage in the Green Revolution. And in the 1980s, discussions were common about using computers in developing countries. And this is still high on the agenda. In the current times, the discussion has shifted to talking about frontier technologies. So frontier technologies are new and rapidly developing technologies that take advantage of digitalization and connectivity. So that they have these two components. They have digitalization, but they also combine it with connectivity. So examples of frontier technologies are artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, big data, blockchain, etc., etc. So these technologies, basically, they take advantage of the reduction in the price of data storage, or they take advantage of the internet, and they take also take advantage of the ability to use solar energy. So yes, high tech changes over time, but it generally refers to resource intensive technologies. So with each technology, there's an interest in applying it to solve problems in all countries, and particularly in developing countries. Basically, in the earlier times, the assumption was, let's introduce a technology to developing countries, and it will work at wonder. It's just enough to give the developing countries tractors, give them whatever the technology, and it's going to be great. It's going to be cause a lot of benefits to this. But this approach has had mixed results. In the case of mechanization of developing countries agriculture, introducing tractors to many developing countries has short-lived benefits. The results were often rusting, massive Fergusons in the field. As people, they didn't know how to maintain the technologies. They didn't have access to spare parts. Even getting fuels for the technologies could be challenging to low-income farmers. The Green Revolution was supposed to increase agricultural yield massively. And I'm just going to see if I move this here. Hybrid seeds were mostly rice, and war weeds were planted in the fields of many developing countries. These high yield seeds, they required expensive chemical fertilizers. They also needed sophisticated irrigation methods. So and more use of water than traditional seeds. So they often became unaffordable to low-income farmers. So the impacts of the Green Revolutions were therefore not as large as expected. So both of these examples show that technology itself was not enough, and much more attention had to be paid to the use of the technologies in the wider context of developing countries. So this experience led to much skepticism of use of technologies to solve developing countries' problems, often justifiable skepticism. I just want to say a brief story. In 1986, I was doing my master's degree at Carleton, and I wrote a research essay on computer communications in developing countries. I worked on a project that Professor Warren Thongate was involved with, and was funded by the International Development Research Center in Ottawa. Warren suggested that I should actually write to people who had been active in development work, and I should ask them what their views were about using computers in developing countries, what they thought about using them for communications. So at the time, I mean, I wrote actual letters and put them in the mail, and I got several, it's so a long time ago, I got several responses, and most of them were fairly positive responses. But there was one respondent who was extremely dismissive of using computers in developing countries. He said, "You're wasting your time studying computer communications in developing countries. The last thing they need are computers." And I've sort of kept this message in mind several times and revisited this throughout my career when I've been looking at sort of computers development in developing countries. Nowadays, it would be difficult to find anyone who thinks developing countries should stay away from computers. Even low-income people in developing countries, they carry a small computer that is a cell phone around, and cell phone actually have proven themselves to be more appropriate than landlines in most developing countries, as they don't require as much infrastructure as landlines do. There's also lots of benefits that can't be reaped through cell phones. For instance, farmers can easily gain access to market information, and through their cell phone, through their small computer, and they can plan more efficiently when and where they want to market their products. Also, sending money has with cell phone has become very common in many developing countries. The M-Pesa is an example of a system to transfer money using cell phone technology. It was founded in 2007 in Kenya, and has been in common use in Kenya way before we Canadians, we started to use e-transfer on a regular basis. So there was this uptake of technology, and it was in productive use throughout society in several countries. So basically the message is that there's definitely a mixed experience in transferring technologies to developing countries, but there are as many success stories as there are failures. So it is a mixed bag. So I've done a lot of work on health biotechnology, and I cannot count how many times people have said to me, developing countries, they don't need health biotechnology, they need clean water. And another variant of this message is, developing countries, they don't need new health biotechnologies, they need better distribution of existing health products. And there is no doubt in my mind that both of these messages are right, in the sense that developing countries, they do need clean water, and they need a much better distribution of existing health products. For example, a simple health product such as measles vaccine. It could improve health by being better distributed. But I want to argue that developing countries also need new health biotechnology products. They need better access to health biotechnology for health problems that both low-income countries and rich countries suffer from. For example, they need better access to COVID vaccines than is currently the case. And they also need health biotechnology solution to health problems that are more prevalent in tropical countries. So that's more that are not shared by high-income countries. There's several problems that are in need of solutions. So there's a lot of unmet need for health biotechnology and other technologies in developing countries. And one of the challenges is actually lack of access. When it comes to access to technologies, the playing field in high and low income countries is very uneven. Here is a graph that shows GDP per capita for core countries. They are in the orange, and for peripheral countries, they are in blue. Core countries are Western countries, and Japan. Peripheral countries are the rest of the world. This graph starts in 1700s and is basically until current times. And if you look at the graphs in the 1700s and in the early times, there is not much difference between GDP per capita in between developing countries or the core peripheral countries and the core countries. It's both had very low GDP per capita, but we can start to see that in the late 1700s and early 1800s, with the Industrial Revolution, the GDP per capita in the core countries started to increase. Started slowly to increase, but there was an increase there. And then each technology wave, when you look at them, the age of steam and railways, there was an increase of the GDP per capita by core countries, not so much by peripheral countries. The age of steel, electricity, and heavy engineering, the age of oil, the automobile and mass production, the age of ICT, and as we go along, the gap between the peripheral countries and the core countries becomes larger and larger. You can see that there has also been some benefits in terms of GDP per capita in the peripheral countries, and they are in a better position in terms, for instance, of life expectancy and several other indicators. You know, that there has been an improvement, which is the good news. But the bad news is that the gap is becoming so gigantic between the countries. So the technological waves haven't benefited the peripheral country to the same extent. When we look at the current access to internet, we see a very uneven access between the countries like North American countries, Western European countries, and countries in Africa. We see the so-called digital divide. North American countries are in the highest category, with 80 to 100% of the population having access to internet, whereas many African countries are in the lowest category, with 0 to 20% of the population having access to internet. So without access to internet, there is no way that African countries can take advantage of frontier technologies. It's out of the question. So there's not only a divide between the countries, there's also divides within countries. If we look at the least developed countries, for instance, there's a large divide between rural and urban areas, where urban areas have much better access to mobile phone technology in this case than the rural areas. And we see also when we look at when we look at the access of mobile phones by women and men, we also see that there is a difference, and you can guess who is likely to have better access in that respect. So lack of access can be because of many reasons. They can because of lack of availability. There's the technology is not available. There's a lack of affordability. It's too expensive for people to be able to afford. There's a lack of awareness. There's the information about the technology is not there. There's a lack of accessibility to use it under the certain circumstances. And and there's also a lack of ability for effective use, of incapacity to use them. So access is clearly a large problem in many developing countries, and a large number of people are not going to be able to benefit from technologies because they don't have access to basic internet or mobile phones. So now I want to shift gears and look at health biotechnology in developing countries. It's an area I have done quite a bit of work on. I want to discuss cases where developing countries themselves have been able to be active in providing health biotechnology products and services, and actually by doing so, where they have been able to enhance access to these technology for their own populations. So most products and services are in health biotechnology are developed by international pharma and Western-based biotech firms. They have a reputation of neglecting health problems in developing countries. There's a discussion about neglected diseases, neglected tropical diseases. There has, however, been an increasing focus on diseases of developing countries in the last decades, by pharma, by philanthropic organizations, and others. So there's been a increasing funding for research in these areas, and so there's been more investment. So it's not as black and white as it was, that pharma was just ignoring health problems in developing countries because there was not the same market value in it. There was not a market demand wasn't for them. People couldn't afford to pay for them, which is the reason that there wasn't a market demand. But whereas in Western countries, people can pay for the products, or health systems can pay for it. So there was a more secure income from developing health products for richer countries. So, but what has been happening in the last decades in many low and middle income countries, that they have started to focus on their own health biotechnology development, and with the expectation that they will provide population with health biotech products and services created by their local efforts. In the interest of time, I'm going to talk about two countries. I'm going to talk about India and Cuba. Just a little. So India has a long history of having a strong pharmaceutical industry with a capacity for bulk manufacturing and relatively low cost products. So it has relied on these pharma strengths in its health biotechnology development. And some of the Indian pharma companies have shifted over to biotechnology. So that's been a benefit for India, that this previous experience in pharma. An example of an early strength in health biotechnology were modifications of an existing hepatitis B vaccine that an Indian biotechnology firm carried out. So by doing this modification, they could actually lower the price of the hepatitis B vaccine compared to what it was on the global market. So at the time, the hepatitis B vaccine was produced for $16 a dose, but the Indian company started to produce it at 50 cents a dose, was mainly because of the product innovation that they carried out. So they had lower production process. They managed to lower production process, and by doing so, the Indian biotechnology sector has been active in dealing with COVID pandemic. It has a huge role in manufacturing vaccines against COVID, but also in developing diagnostic kits to test for the virus. So in the early days of the pandemic, Indian companies could revamp their production capacity in both areas very quickly. So Indian companies, they, for example, manufacture now around 9 COVID vaccines. And a couple of these vaccines are Indian innovations, so they are developed locally, totally. And India has also more COVID vaccines in development, or in the pipeline. There has also been a dramatic drop in the cost of diagnostic kits. They cost about $24 a kit in the early days of the pandemic, and now the cost has been reduced to 67 cents, which makes them much more affordable for the population. As I mentioned, there's a huge manufacturing capacity in India and in manufacturing vaccines. And some of the firms, they can produce up to 275 million doses of vaccine a day. This is astounding ability in terms of production. So moving to Cuba, it started to develop biotechnology in the late 1980s with the expectation that it would contribute to improved health on the island. Fidel Castro was a great believer in biotechnology, and he pushed the development in the country, both by providing funding for biotechnology production and capacity building and production, and also by providing motivation to the researcher. He visited the labs that were trying to pursue biotechnology almost daily to see how things are going. So it was personally very much invested in health biotechnology in the country. So Cubans then managed to learn early on how to produce the biotech product interferon, and they started to see if it worked for different health problems on the island, for dengue fever, for different cancer, and etc. Most of the time, the results were not promising, and but actually through this experimentation, they got a lot of opportunities to learn how to produce things efficiently. So in the late 1980s, Cuba successfully developed the first vaccine against meningitis B in the world, and by applying the vaccine, they managed to deal with a meningitis outbreak in the country. So basically the health biotechnology development was delivering in the sense of being able to address local health problem. Cubans now have tons of patents in health biotechnology. They file them all over the world. They export both the products, and they also transfer the technologies to several countries. They have set up joint ventures with many countries in the world based on their biotechnology development. So these two countries, they have been able to harness biotechnology, which is not an easy task. A lot of health products that pass examination through biotechnology never make it to the market as they don't pass clinical trials. That is a fact of developing health products. It's a risky business in that respect. What is particularly important is that health biotechnology development in both countries has led to better access to the technology by the populations, and it has also generated income for both countries and developed local expertise, including research capacity. So it has had tangible benefits. India has excelled at process innovation, which contributed to lower cost of health products. It was also a lower part of the lower cost of health products is because of lower labor costs in India compared to Western countries. But that wasn't the whole story. There was also an element of process innovation that reduced the expense of production. Cuba has managed to develop several new to the world innovation and has filed a high number of patents. So there are many reasons for their success. One is, as I mentioned earlier, they could learn from failures and sort of slowly build up. But another reason is that they consider the technologies from a systemic perspective. They understood that there were many different components needed to be able to develop health biotechnology successfully. And that these components, they had to be well aligned so the system can work. So one of the components was to build a strong regulatory system, and both countries did that. But this was only part of the formula. So here's a sort of very simplified picture of health biotechnology innovation system. It reflects some of the main components or actors: government, R&D institution, education institution, financial institutions. But it also shows that the close linkages that are necessary between all these actors for innovation to take place. It also shows that the importance of social acceptance of the technology and the ability of the technology to actually meet local needs, to be applied locally, it really feeds into the innovation, potentials in the country. So in this case, we have innovating firm as an innovation agent, but it can also be a public organization. It certainly is a public organization in the case of Cuba. But as long as a public organization is focused on introducing the product or services to the market, it's an innovation that's being applied. So the message is that it's possible to improve access to technology by low and middle income countries developing their own technologies. They can provide solutions themselves. So I want to now move to the last section of this talk, and I want to answer the question: is high tech only for rich countries? And you're not going to be surprised by my answer, but my answer is no. It's if high income countries are the only countries that have access to high tech, we are only going to increase the inequities in the world. There is a strong correlation between harnessing technology and improving quality of life and the income earning potentials of countries. We need low and middle income countries to have much better access to these sources of wealth. They definitely need clean water. They need to have better distribution of existing technological solutions, but they also need to be full participants in technology development. And we need to support the capacity in coming up with solutions to their own problems. There are many technologies that can provide opportunities to contribute toward addressing development challenges in low and middle income countries. I want to present a few examples from a technology needs assessment I recently conducted for several least developed countries. These are the poorest countries in the world. But I just want to show you the variety of technologies that can contribute to the development in this field. This is not a complete list. But these technologies are based on suggestions from local experts in the countries that we focused on. I want to preface the discussion on the technology opportunity by emphasizing that technology by itself is rarely the solution to development problems in low and income countries. The problems are complex and multidimensional, but technology can certainly support development initiatives. But we need more. We need social policies. We need to have a wider focus than just technology. In all the countries, there was a message that the internet needs to be enhanced. It needs to be more reliable. It needs to be less expensive, and there needs to be much better internet coverage. It's especially the internet coverage in rural areas is extremely poor, and basically which marginalizes populations in sort of different parts of the countries. So basically in health, when we look at health, the local experts emphasize the potential of e-health to provide better access to health services. So there typically are very few health professionals in the least developed countries, and to connect them through e-health can expand health services to many marginalized areas. Another technology in health that the local expert mentioned was to use drones to deliver health products, deliver medicines, for instance, to the more remote areas. They can drop off medicines quickly to remote areas, and the combination of both e-health and drone technologies can really expand health services in more marginalized areas. Another example of technology for health in the least developed countries was geospatial mapping of diseases. This can enhance the monitoring and planning of health services, and it could also allow countries to respond more quickly to emerging outbreaks. There are potential for providing clean drinking water using technologies. It's possible, for example, to use desalination technology to create drinking water from seawater. Many island states have limited drinking water, and to be able to use the sea would be an asset. The same applies to many coastal areas. Solar energy can provide the energy needs for this process, so it's not demanding a lot from the sort of from other energy sources. There are also several water purification technologies available to make water safe to drink. The trick is to make these technologies easy to use and to make them affordable. So by doing so, they can be applied better in low resource settings. In agriculture, there are potential to use information and communication technologies to support farming. There are apps that farmers can, for example, get up-to-date farming information. They can get customized advice. They can get information on market prices, on weather forecasts, etc. There are also artificial intelligence technologies that make precision farming possible. And they allow more efficient planning of agricultural production, more efficient use of inputs such as waters and fertilizers. They would be customized to a particular field in question and to the sort of changing environmental conditions. So they're very well customized to what's happening in the country in the particular part. In the environmental sector, there are several examples of technologies that can be used. One is bioremediation, where biotechnology is used to remove pollutants and toxins from both soil and water. There's also a lot of opportunities to use drones in the environmental sector. Drones can, for example, be used for environmental monitoring, etc. There's also possibility to rely on Internet of Things for example, to monitor groundwater. And there's a case, for instance, where Bangladesh is doing that. So these are just a few examples of technologies that can enhance quality of life in low-income countries. and they can provide opportunities for increasing the income of the population. Solar energy should definitely also be on this list, as it provides really extensive options for providing energy in sunny countries. E-learning can also provide important education opportunities for population, etc., etc. There's quite a more. So all kinds of technologies are relevant for low-income countries. If these countries do not have access to the technologies, their ability to generate income, deal with environmental issues, promote health in the population is diminished. So the gap between the rich countries of the world and the low-income countries is, as I said, only going to become larger if the frontier technologies are not being harnessed in low-income countries. There are many challenges for promoting technology development. Lack of funding is, not surprisingly, a large challenge in low-income countries. There is neither availability of public nor private funding for instance, for research and development activities. As a result, for instance, the average allocation to R&D in sub-Saharan Africa is, for example, only 0.38% of GDP, when the aim of the African Union is for countries to allocate 1% of their GDP to research and development efforts. There is also a low technological and innovation capacity, and that's another challenge. Skills levels are often low when it comes to technology. STEM skills need to increase substantially in low-income countries to be able to take advantage of these technologies. Another area is that lack of policy coherence. In cases where government wants to promote technology development, there often are policies and practices in place that limit the government efforts. There are policies, practices that actually work against each other, and ministries, they often don't talk together. So the different ministries, other ministries, they don't coordinate efforts. They don't necessarily work together. There's quite a bit of silos. It's a typical feature of the sort of governance structures in many of these countries. One issue is political instability. That's another challenge. Many low-income countries have political conflicts within the countries, and they have frequent changes of government. As an example of that, I worked last year on technology needs assessments in 7 least developed countries, but I had to stop my work abruptly in 3 of these countries, in 3 out of 7 countries, because there were political instabilities, including military coups. So there was this kind of instability is does really diminish the efforts to promote technological development in the country as well as other development. One issue that's is a typical feature of low-income countries is that they have a very young population. It's actually both a challenge and an opportunity. It's a challenge to provide the young population with good education, with employment opportunities. But that's, at the same time, if they can become technologically savvy, they can be a great source for new ideas, for new innovation, for a lot of vitality in these countries. I've actually worked on projects where I have been interviewing young entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs in several least developed countries. And it's been a pleasure to work with them, because they've been so enthusiastic and so keen to want to see a change in the countries. So it's they've been very driven to harness technologies for the countries. So the issue is that we need to learn to promote more inclusive technology development, to promote technology in a much more equitable manner. Promoting inclusive technology development is a challenge, but we have to learn how to avoid increasing the gaps and leaving low-income countries further behind. And we also need to learn how we can promote technology development so that it doesn't marginalize particular populations, such as rural populations, lower income groups, particular ethnic groups, or women. There are no simple solutions for how we can do this, but we can start by not looking at high technology as only being needed in high enriched countries. On this note, I want to say thank you for your attention and open the floor for discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Halla. That was a very, very insightful talk. You packed a lot in a little time.
Okay.
Let's try to open it up to the audience. See if you have out there any comments or questions Halla can answer. I saw a hand go up.
There is one.
Chris.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks, Halla. I'm just curious about the lack of policy coherence, one that you spoke about. I mean, that's not unique to developing countries. We often see that in Canada too, both federally and provincially. But I'm just wondering, in developing countries in particular, and especially the lower income countries, because they're so reliant on multinational donor agencies of one sort or another, if the different agendas of those donor agencies could also contribute to policy incoherence in those countries, which ultimately works against the goals of development.
Okay, thank you for this question. It's actually it is actually the case that there's a challenge when countries are working with multiple donors. That the donors typically, they don't coordinate their approach, and they all come with a set of money and their priorities and want to work with the government. So there's often a vertical on single issues focus by donor. For instance, so some in health, there is an interest in promoting HIV to address HIV challenges in developing countries, and they put money into HIV, but they don't put money into the health system, which is more horizontal, so which makes it much less effective. And so this does certainly contribute towards a more kind of broken up priorities in developing countries. But we can also see that like there is just like industrial policies in countries and technology policies in countries are not coordinated. So the coordination is not only from donors, but there's also, it's also from local actors in the system. And it's a huge problem, and I think it's a problem also in Canada that people from different ministries, they don't talk to each other. They work too much in silos, and that's a sort of a feature of a very common feature of it. In all this discussion about lack of policy coherence, there are exceptions, and not, and there is some countries have been able to have promote a lot of policy coherence and a lot of collaboration within the countries. And one country that comes to mind is Cuba. There's a lot of collaboration in Cuban health biotechnology by different organizations. There's a policy coherence as well. They've had this sort of pretty much the same government since 1959, so that makes it easier. So, but that has this at the same time this have been able to promote that level of policy coherence has facilitated the health biotechnology development in the country.
Thank you. Halla, we have a chat question from Jan Johns. Is Elon Musk's satellite system helping the problem, solve the problem?
Okay. I must say that I don't know how much Elton satellite system is helping the problem. The aim is to provide satellites to more rural areas and to make it more accessible. I haven't really seen any evaluation of how effective it is, so I cannot comment. But it's the kind of technology that certainly can enhance internet access to use satellite technology in generally and I mean, so there's potentials for it, but I can't comment on that.
Other questions from the audience? I see a hand go up.
Everybody wants to just start the weekend, have a nice Friday night.
Not yet. I have one question that's always intrigued me, having to do with corruption and exploitation.
Yes.
I mean, there's an old saying that if any social problem or medical problem exists for over 3 weeks, it creates a new class of people trying to solve it. And one manifestation of this is I find when you try to introduce a new technology or something else into an existing culture, you often threaten people who are benefiting from the existing culture, and they fight back. I mean, the argument for improving technology in developing countries is such a strong one. You would think that no one would disagree with it. But do you see worrying cases of bribery or takeover of funding for projects by street gangs?
I see two things from your question. One is sort of reluctance to kind of accept new technologies, and there is always adoption of technology is always different according to different groups. There are always those who are very early adopters, take every technology, but then there are people who don't see their benefits being met by the technology. But in terms of the corruption, then I mean, I've done a lot of work in least developed countries, and when you look at the sort of international corruption index, they are some of the most corrupt countries in the world. So there is certainly potential of corruption with technology products in these things, in these products in countries. One of the things which I personally think, and is the case, is that like there might be some corruptions in technology products, but you're going to see a much higher level of corruption in larger infrastructure products than sort of usually smaller technology problems. There's much more scope for corruption when there's a lot of different actors at play. When for instance there is a very strict protocol of funding by many multinational companies, by many donor organizations. So it's more challenging to sort of to carry out corruption, I think, in technology product than the more kind of large scale, usually infrastructure product. Even to the extent like I've been interviewing people in an unnamed African country where there is they were not so keen on the health research that was that I was evaluating. They said, we know all this. What we need is actually for you to come here and build clinics and hospitals. We don't need to do this research. That's not necessary. And a little part of me thought like perhaps there was a self-interest also in saying we need this clinic and hospitals because there is a high potential of ciphering money through that. But maybe that was just my skeptical mind.
Or maybe not.
And it's always difficult to get any proofs of things like that. I haven't encountered corruption in my projects yet. Nothing that
One perhaps last question from Jan Johns again. To what extent does the United Nations offer assistance or solutions to developing countries
with technology? There are several United Nations organizations that work on this sort of on the agenda of technology development in lower middle income countries. I mean, then there is UNCTAD was one of the organization that I quoted in the talk. I used a graph from them. They do a lot of work on sort of looking at policies for technology development in different parts of developing countries, and so there's a lot of kind of work in charting the technology development pathways. Sometimes people say that there's too much work done on actually researching things, and that rather than in promoting development. So that there's a sort of a need for shorter research area and more action area. And I worked with an UN organization that sort of took that perspective, and they did technology needs assessment. Their technology needs assessment didn't take 2-3 years. They took sort of 6 months to carry out, because they wanted that kind of focus. But then they wanted to continue after that with the next step would be technology implementation, and there would be a very kind of a specific plan would be hashed out, and there would be a strong role by the organization in pairing different countries with different donors that wanted to work on it, because this is a very small technology development organization in the UN system. However, the newest I heard from it is that it had to lay off people because they have so little funding. So sometimes that is also a problem, that like good plans are not being carried out because the fundings, even like within large organizations like the UN system, it's not available. So I think there is a lot of attempts by the UN system. So, but there has been some criticism that they could be more effective in terms of implementation. And anything
Anything else? Any last
anything
questions?
else?
All right. Well, thank you once again, Halla, for an interesting talk on a topic that most people don't consider from day to day. So I learned something new, and I appreciate that. Someone once said that science is art using numbers. I like that. Thanks to Mel Turner for the technical assistance once again. He's
Thank you.
a miracle maker and did his stuff again. Thanks to Glenda Jones, who wrote some of the publicity for this talk and continues to do that with others very well. Mostly thanks to the audience for your continued interest and showing up tonight. We appreciate that. And finally, I'll mention that the next Almont lecture will be a return of Richard Van Loon, the former president of Carleton University, who loves to look at historical things in Canada, who's going to talk about David Thompson, Canada's epic map maker, on the last Friday in November, 25th of November at 7:30 via Zoom. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get more notices about that. If you aren't on that mailing list, please go to Almont Lectures, that's one word, at, what is it? I'm getting too tired. Almont Lectures .net or .com. It has all the details. Is that enough for now?
I
Rest
think
up for the
so.
next one? Okay. Thank you again for coming, folks, and good night. Have a good
Good night.
weekend.
Thank you. Bye.